just start my video.
Yep.
All right. So the way that we're going to work this today, we have several presenters. We have Max Poletto, we have Deb Banks, we have Mary Gersema, we have Mark Thomas, and we have Narayan Krishnamoorthy. And we'll be going in that order, and it will match for the segment on talking about start groups in the order in which they are started actually at PBP, which means then that we'll go 80-hour first, then 90-hour group, and then 84-hour group. So while each presenter is giving their presentation, if you have questions of that presenter, use the Q&A feature, please, and type the name of the person that you want to answer the question as the preface to that, and then ask your question. And as each presenter finishes, they will then provide answers via the Q&A feature by typing them in as the next presenter is giving their piece. And then when the second presenter finishes, they will then start answering the Q&A questions while the third presenter is doing their presentation. At the very end, what I've asked the presenters to do is to give the best question or the most frequent question asked, and then answer that in the group setting here so that it gets into the recording. And then we'll go in the order in which the presenters presented as well. So first off, I'd like to, this is something that I neglected to do in the first presentation, was to explain who the heck I am. So I'll take just a moment here to explain that. I've been a Randonneurs USA member since 2004. I finished my first SR series in 2005. And I've been to PBP in 07, 11, 15, and 19. I did not finish in 2007. And the whole reason why I've gotten into organizing first for my local brevet region, but for now all other regions, these seminars is because I left PBP 2007 knowing that there was a lot that I didn't get done right and didn't prepare for, and came back in 2011 having worked very hard on fixing all of those issues. And out of that grew my desire to try and share that knowledge as widely as possible. So that's how all of these seminars came to be. They came from a long list of steps taken to prepare for PBP, first personally, then for my club, and now for as much of RUSA as can possibly be. So the first presenter today is going to be Max Poletto, and Max is going to be talking about the 80-hour group start. And Max has been a randonneur since 2003, where he rode with the New England Randonneurs. And then Max moved west and rode for at least 10 years with the San Francisco Randonneurs, during which time he started our adventure series, which is the SR series of very challenging mixed terrain routes, a 2, 3, 4, and 600K. And that we've tried to hold every year. Sometimes pandemics have gotten in the way of our holding the whole series, but Max is the person that created those routes. Max is the person that organized all of the volunteers and the dates and all of that stuff. And Max has now turned that over to somebody else locally, because Max is now and has been riding his brevets in Switzerland for the last 4 years. So Max, if you are ready.
Yes, can you hear me?
Very lightly.
Okay, I'll try to move. Is this any better?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm gonna, so I guess my video isn't working. What but I'll see if I can share my screen.
There it is.
Can you see that?
Yeah,
And is that still working?
it looks great.
Cool, great. All right, so this should take about 10 minutes or so. Just a quick recap first about my own PvP history to sort of frame this. My first PvP attempt was in 2007 in the 80-hour group. I DNF'd. My bike was lost in transit. I, in an emergency, purchased a bike that was far too small for me. The weather was cold. My hands got numb. It was a disaster. I quit in Brest. But then I came back in 2015 and 2019. Again, both times in the 80-hour group, and finished with relatively fast times, 53 to 55 hours. So in this talk, primarily I'll be talking about my own experience, sort of riding for time, but I'm hoping that there's information here that's also useful for riders who are interested in the 80-hour group and are not necessarily riding for a fast time. Quick context about what this experience was like for me. A fast 80-hour ride plan means you start on the first day around 4 or 5 p.m. It means that you get to the Vilaine-les-Juelles control, 220K in, sometime before midnight, 10 or 11 p.m. And your first sunrise is on day 2, finds you somewhere between Tintignac and Loudéac. So you've covered around 350 or 400 kilometers at this point. So you can get into Brest sort of in the middle of the afternoon of that second day, head right back, and arrive in Loudéac shortly after dark, nap there, and then continue on your way through the night. Sunrise will probably find you sometime around Tintignac, and at that point it's about 350K to the finish, and you arrive in Paris as night falls on that third day. And this was definitely a sort of type 2 fun experience. You can see the expression on my face in that photo. A lot of the ride felt like that to me, both times. One thing that I found interesting in my 2 successful experiences were that the start waves seemed very different. So in 2015, I'm not sure how many start waves there were. In 2019, there were 5. In 2015, I was in the A wave, which, so it's basically the first starters in the 80-hour group, the first people to start PvP. And this group was mostly race bikes, mostly riders with support. So they had, friends or relatives meeting them at controls. They typically had very little gear with them. They were basically like going out for a club ride. Each stage was like a club ride. There was lots of littering. So they'd, peel open an energy bar and just not even bother putting it back in the pocket. Things just like go onto the road. The start was very fast and dangerous. We saw several crashes just in the first few kilometers. On the plus side, we got to Fougères, which is about 307 kilometers in less than 10 hours. So you can really make good time at the beginning there. In 2019, my friend Brian and I chose the E wave, and this was still pretty fast, but not quite as much as A. Generally less motivated, a little bit less skilled, we thought, sort of some sketchy sort of paceline and echelon dynamics, but still oddly competitive. So arguments would break out when gaps would form in pacelines and so on. And definitely our experience was that if we wanted to go really fast, we had to be at the front and pull, which was different from the A group. The A group, we could not really hang with the front of the A group. They were too fast for us. One interesting note, there's a sort of start wave gamesmanship where some riders will wait for friends to sign up and then start in a later wave because of the sort of psychological advantage of catching up instead of being caught by someone. Of course, this can backfire if your wave is slower and you sort of spend too much energy trying to catch up to your friends in the earlier wave. A word about the return leg. If you ride out to Brest quickly, if you sort of take advantage of these paceline and group dynamics on the outbound leg, and so you make it out to Brest in, say, somewhere between 22 and 30 hours, that gives you a lot of flexibility for the return. If you decide to take it easy, then you really have a lot of time buffer. Or if you're riding for time, then you have a good chance of riding the last third or quarter of the ride in daylight back to Paris. One thing to note is, my rule of thumb is if you're trying to go as hard as you can, expect to be about 6 hours slower on the return than on the outbound. So if you make it to Brest in 22 hours, it'll take you, 28 hours to get to Paris. So for a total ride time of 50 hours. If you make it out there in 24, then, expect roughly a 54-hour ride time. Assuming that everything goes well, you don't have any like severe mechanicals or anything like that. Some pros and cons of the 80-hour group. One definite advantage is that you cover a lot of distance on the first day in daylight. So on both occasions, we covered between 180 and 200K before it was dark on day one. And there's this very strong paceline advantage, right, where the first 300K go by in 10 hours potentially if you're in the right group, which makes it easier to get to Brest overall than if you are riding by yourself, and gives you more buffer for the return leg. This also means the controls outbound are less crowded. And if you choose to keep going at a high pace, then you will also have less crowded controls, roughly from Tintagnac or Fougères all the way back to Paris. The disadvantages are sort of the complement of this. So the riding at the start is quite scary, especially the 2015 A wave. I thought was one of the highest adrenaline cycling experiences of my life. That year, the ride started not in Rambouillet, but in Saint-Quentin-Yvelines. And so there's lots of road furniture and sort of lane dividers and so on. And we saw lots of crashes. Some of them looked quite severe, like broken fork, sort of rider on pavement kind of crashes. And then the second disadvantage is that when you head back from Paris, then by the time you get to Carhaix or Loudéac, you meet sort of the large bulge of outbound riders, which means that the crowds at the controls are truly huge. And also you have this continuous stream of bright headlights outbound, beaming into you. So that's quite unpleasant. So in conclusion, I would say if you have a time goal like Charlie Miller or some other specific time you want to achieve, then definitely the 80 hours is the start to pick. Also, if you don't necessarily have such a goal, but you're confident that you can do one fast 600K, then you could do the 80 hours and sort of ride the wave of fast outbound riders to Brest and then have plenty of time on the way back. Otherwise, probably one of the other start times might be safer. For example, in 2007, when I had all of my mechanical problems with my small bike, if I had had a few more hours in the bank to rest and sort of recuperate, I may not have DNF'd in Brest like I did. And then finally, don't stress too much about all these times and so forth. Don't forget the pastries and the other nice things that France has to offer. And that's all for my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Max. Max, one thing before we go to the next presenter, I wanted to ask you if all of the 80-hour start waves are so frenetic as some of the experiences that you related in some of the earlier start groups. So yeah. Is all of the 80-hour start waves seemingly more like a race than what people understand PvP is?
Well, I mean, that was sort of the a little bit of what I tried to get across in the difference between A and E. So
Okay.
I think that every wave has some people in it that are definitely going for time.
Right.
The A wave, in my experience, it felt like everyone was going hard. It was really hard charging and, like I said, almost dangerous. The E wave that Brian and I rode in 2019 was much more varied. There was definitely sort of riders who just seemed like they were going at a more gentle, more sort of tourist pace, and then others who were maybe more aggressive. And Brian and I certainly were at the head of that group. So
Okay. Well, thanks. So I apologize to everyone. I am not able to get the video feed for each individual presenter to show at this moment. We can, as you saw, show their slide shows, but otherwise I'm still working on this. And let's transition next to Deb, Deb Banks. Deb is a second-time presenter for this. You may remember her from the first PBP prep seminar. Deb Banks has been riding brevets. She began in 2007 and since then has accomplished quite a number of Randonneur achievements. Among those, the Mondial Award and the K-Hound status. She's done a Super 6 and she has earned her Ultra Randonneur Award. She's also a two-time finisher of PBP, and Deb doesn't just get things from randonneuring. She has also contributed quite a bit. She served on the board for 6 years. She just finished her 6th year. She is currently the head of the chair of the gravel committee, and news about the gravel program that Russo will be introducing will be coming out over the course of this year. So Deb, if you are ready. Deb, I can't hear you.
I had gotten my screen up and then I had muted myself. All right, can you guys see my screen? I hope so.
We can see Saba.
You can see Saba.
Yeah, but go ahead and switch to your presentation.
I have. I'm seeing my presentation.
We are not.
Huh, that's weird. Okay, let's try this a third time.
Okay.
Sharing my screen. I'm showing it right here. Sorry, everybody.
There it is.
Okay, so thank you. I might have moved that a little bit too fast. Here we go. Why choose the 90-hour start? That's my task to talk a little bit about today. And I had to choose the 90-hour start all 3 times that I attempted PBP because I am not the fastest rider. And so, I'm perfect to talk about the 90-hour start because I couldn't do the 80-hour start if my life depended on it. And I may be able to do the 84-hour start, but I'm not sure why I would. And here's why. When you choose the 90-hour start, you have got the best insurance policy for completion. If things go wrong, if you have horrible mechanicals, as Max described in his presentation with his first PBP, you have digestive issues, you have horrible weather. I was on that same 2007 PBP and I was able to finish. You've got 90 hours. That's a lot of minutes, that's a lot of seconds, that's a lot of time to kind of take care of and maybe manage some of the problems that might come your way. So you can still ride quickly. I'm not going to offer up that you can Charlie Miller during the 90-hour, although the original folks were able to. But in this day and age, I think with so many people that are on the ride, that's unlikely. So if you really are looking for a fast race type time, then 90 hours is not for you. I'll just say that straight up. But here's some of the good stuff. On the day of the ride, you get to get a full night's sleep. You can nap in the afternoon. You can enjoy a fabulous meal. You can celebrate your friends as they take off for their wave. and you don't have to worry about getting to the start. Like especially true for the 84-hour start, which starts early in the morning the following day. So we were able to have a big meal, wish our friends off, and then we also got to watch the 80-hour group take off. This was in 2011, and you get to catch up with your friends and then watch everybody else take off, which is really fun. Then also in the start, at least in 2007, in the old days, you would line up in the stadium and wait for hours to slowly work your way around to kind of get over the chip and get your brevet card signed. And there was this huge bulge. And that bulge has been minimized in years since with this wave idea where people, line up and you get a time that you need to be in your wave. This is our wave, it's the J wave. And there are a lot of people in it, no doubt about it. But the waves depart just about every 15 minutes. So while there's still a lot of riders on the road, they start to spread out a little bit faster than in the old days when it felt incredibly dangerous when you would kind of ride along within this bulge. And this is in 2019. Within an hour and a half, we had spread out on the road. So this is us on our J wave. And, frankly, it's not a huge, horrible problem like it used to be in the old days. I am going to say that very first start out of the gate in PBP, every time I've done PBP, there are a lot of riders and there can be a lot of jostling around for position and pelotons getting into line. And so you really have to watch your P's and Q's. I mean, everybody's a little antsy, everybody's excited, everybody's a little bit nervous. So you just have to really be a little extra careful. But once you get going, you settle in and you're riding and it's just like you're riding a ride, and that's fabulous. So here's the other thing. Yes, controls are more crowded, but the organizers have gotten much better at managing food and people and lines, especially on the outbound. On the return, as Max mentioned, you've got riders that are from different hours all ending up at the same controls at the same time. And that's definitely a little bit harder. But there's not much you can do about it unless you can get your card stamped and then move out of the control itself and go find food at a restaurant or someplace else. True for sleeping as well. Because to be clear, there are a lot of people on Paris, Brest, Paris. 7,500 of your brand new favorite riding friends are all riding together at the same time. And that's one of the most amazing and wonderful things about PBP is that you are riding next to a group of Danish people, and then you're in the mix with some Taiwanese, and then all of a sudden you're with the Japanese, and then you're with the Spaniards, and then you're back in with your French, and you might never see a lot of your own friends that you see all the time. Sleeping is a problem, can be a problem unless you choose to get a hotel off site, and the bathrooms are a mess. They're just a mess. So bring your own toilet paper, wipes, whatever you need to do, because they're a mess it doesn't matter what time you start, they're pretty messy. But I guess my point is think through your situation prior to going to PBP, and then pre-ride, spend a lot of time thinking about it. And of course, managing your expectations and your ride during the ride, of course. And on the ride, when you're on the 90-hour start, one of the other beautiful things is because you're not racing, is you have time to catch up with friends on their journey. You see them at a control and you can sit down for a minute and go find out what their latest story is. You can meet new friends and you get to see familiar faces. The top right corner of my slide is a young French guy that had joined our group riding, and this is in 2011. And then all of a sudden, this gentleman comes up in the brown sweater, and we're like, who's this guy? And it turns out to be his grandfather, who had ridden PBP in the 70s and was out to ride a couple of Ks as his grandson, cruised by. That was an incredible experience and a really cool story. It's pretty great to be able to stop and take in all the fabulous French, all the stuff that's going on from the locals, the pop-up creperies, coffee on the side of the road, whatever it is. And if you're always really worried about every second of time that you're spending, you don't get to do that or do it as often or as well. And then when it's all done, you get to celebrate. And that's true all across the board. Get to get medals, you get to, give people hugs, you get to cheer them on and in, and that's a fantastic thing. Everybody loves that. But finally, there's only one thing that 90-hour people can do when they join PBP in the 90-hour, and that is to become part of the Society of Adrian Hands. And Adrian Hands was a big advocate and an ancien. He did PBP in 2003. And he believed that every ride should be an adventure, every ride should be enjoyed to its fullest. His PBP in 2003 was 88.55 or later is what you can do to to get completion and to be able to get into the Adrian Hands. I'm lucky, I'm a 2-time Adrian's Hands winner, if you will. I'm a full value gal. My 2007 PVP finished in 89.50 with 10 big minutes to spare. And in 2011, 89.45, I stretched out for an extra 15 minutes. So with that, 90 hours worth every second. Thanks.
Thanks, Deb. So our next presenter, who will cover the 84-hour group, will be Mary Gersema. Mary, if you could introduce yourself, give us some of your background here. I've kind of misplaced my notes for a moment, so if I could bail upon you.
You bet. Hey, everyone. It's really great to see everybody's name up there, so many familiar names. I look forward to hopefully riding again with some of you soon, and then also with some of you perhaps for the first time in the near future. My name is Mary Gersema, and I ride with the DC Randonneurs with my husband. Usually we're riding tandem together. We rode PBP in 2011 and 2019 together on tandem, and both times chose the 84-hour start. So I've been riding randonneuring events since 2005, and I started really more the transportation cyclist. Transportation cycling is my first love because, I mean, if you can get all your needs met on your bike, I mean, isn't that the best way to live? But it's also fun to see how far you can take your riding to really push yourself. And then with what Ed and I do, to share an experience on the same bike, it's pretty awesome. So as I said, 2011 and 2019, Ed Felker and I rode with the 84-hour start on PBP, and we finished both times within like 20 minutes of each other. So it was like not of each other, we were like right by each other, but in terms of, in 2011 was like 20 minutes faster or slower than 2019. So it was 81.5 hours for us. And that's the start that suits us the best so far. Just a little bit of background about the different groups. I pulled this up just so you have a frame of reference. You can see that the smallest group is the 84-hour group. And so sometimes it does feel like a much smaller ride. 917 riders started in the 84-hour group last time. So that's quite a big difference than the over 4,500 people who took the 90-hour start, and then the 1,200 riders who chose to pursue their PVP with the 80-hour start. I also found it of interest, I don't know what it means, but that the DNF rate goes up for each group. And I don't know if that has, I don't know if there's a pattern there, or if it's just something interesting to note. I think when you're taking the 80 or 90-hour start versus the 84-hour start, it's just a completely, it's really a different ride because you are starting that ride on the next day after all the 80s and 90s have gone off. So as you know, on a brevet, it's like the conditions can really change in that amount of time. So, got to back it up here. How does it work? What are you getting yourself into if you choose to take the 84-hour start? Just a few differences. You have a Sunday bike inspection versus the Saturday bike inspection. And you also begin your ride, as I said, in the morning at 5 a.m., which is almost, to my mind, a civilized time in the morning. And that, for me, that tends to work better with my biorhythms. You have 39 hours to get yourself from Rambouillet to Brest. And then the control windows, as you all know, they expand out for that return leg back to Rambouillet. And you typically go out faster on the front leg than you do on the second half of the ride. In this group, we have folks that are from Colorado and then San Francisco in this picture. And I just wanted to give a shout out that for us, the 84-hour ride we did in 2019, it really was a great experience. And I'm not saying this just because Rob Hawks is facilitating, but we rode a lot with Rob Hawks and Anson and Brian and Roy. And it was really just a great experience. And I'm just glad we had it. So I wanted to mention that. Okay. This is a little snap. Here are 3 snapshots of what PVP looks like. You saw in Deb's presentation the waves of the 80s and 90. I think it was the 80s going off. Well, here is the ride start for the 84-hour riders, and it's really just a bunch of people hanging around. It's a little bit more exciting actually than I recall from 2011 because they actually have this exciting like start banner that you ride through. Last time it was like, okay guys, go out, follow the moto, don't hit anything, just have a good ride, goodbye. So I was like, wait, this is PvP, like it doesn't, and it feels kind of like a DC Randonneurs brevet. And it felt that way for a while in 2011. In 2019, there were more people, it seemed, to us relatively, that were taking that start, and we intersected, or excuse me, as special bikes, we go off earlier than those that take the other 84-hour waves, but it didn't seem to take the 84-hour riders long to catch up to us. So I don't know, maybe we were riding slower, but the data doesn't exactly bear that out. But it was still great that we got to be in a group ride much sooner than we had in 2019. So hopefully that will be the case in the future. But these are the early miles. We're actually riding with Doug McLaren in this particular part of PvP. He's out of Chicago, I believe. And this is the control in Valanes, and you can see plenty of seating, and it's pretty low key. I just love Valanes. So anyway, and you know, people, the little kids that carry your tray, I think that's Valanes, right? Where they carry your tray to your spot. Oh, I just love that. Okay, so why 84 versus say the 90? So Deb has talked a lot about some of the reasons why you would choose the 90. So for us, we like the morning start. We actually stayed in Saint Quentin and then we rode over in the morning to get to the ride start, and it was fine. It was good. We had a lot of energy to burn, so we were in great shape too. So and I was worried that we would get lost getting to the start, but you don't, because you see other riders coming out, and guess where they're going? So you're all going to the start of PvP. So you follow, you end up having no problems really getting to the start of the ride. So you maximize day riding by taking the 84 start. The controls are quieter, although in the con side here, they may be beginning to shut down on you, even though you have plenty of time. And this happens in particular at Brest. Villains is amazing. Both times going through Villains, I mean, you just are like, wow, I'm like the most popular bike rider in town. So the party is really going when you're going outbound toward Villains. If you choose, as Deb said, she watched the 80 hours go off, but if you choose, you can also, if you're taking the 84-hour start, you can watch the 80s and the 90s go off. And we did that in 2011, and it was just the most exciting. It was just so fun to see and watch people go by and see these just streams of riders. It was just it was just great to watch it. So if you do take the 84-hour start and you're staying close to the start, you can observe the fanfare that happens with the traditional 80 and 90-hour waves. So someone talked about like not making the right decision they put it in the chat about, it was a mistake for them to take the 84-hour group. You are a bit on the button, not badly, but you have shaved off 6 hours from your finish time. You're agreeing that you're going to complete this ride in 84 hours. So you really want to make sure that you can get that first 600K done in good shape, that you're strong and fit. So as you're going through the season, you can kind of look at your times and see how those stack up against doing something like an 84-hour start. This is a pro and con. I think it's a small field, and it's easier to get into the 84-hour group compared to the 90. At least that's what I recalled last time, is that people who registered late, there were still slots left in the 84-hour group for them to register. So I think there were some people that took the 84-hour start, perhaps because that was all that was left to them, not because they deliberately would have chosen it. So some other things to think about. As I said, it's a small field, might feel like a club ride. That can be good and bad. It's pretty fun to be able to really see familiar. I suppose like the 80s and 90s, you see new faces and you see familiar faces. But we again ended up grouping up quite a bit with Rob Hawks and Nansen and Roy for 3 out of the 4 days, and our friend Jerry, who you see in this picture here. But maybe that's how it is in the other waves as well. You end up finding your group, and that's just how it goes for you, that you're a little pod going through the ride together. So you do spend the first 2 days catching up to the rest of the field. It's kind of a weird feeling because you're like, wait, we are the 84-hour group, but you were like last. So you spend the first 2 days riding into the 90s, essentially the end of the 90s. And when you do that, it's kind of surreal, and you have to be a little bit mindful, especially in the night hours, because people are very tired. They're not generally in the same state as you. They've been riding that much longer. And if you're catching the back of the field, they've been riding that much longer, and they've been riding that much longer without a lot of sleep. So that said, it's also invigorating to catch the larger field. It's super exciting. I think of the moment when we really start to see the field is when we're coming over the rock de Travezel, and then the folks who took the 90-hour start are coming back up and over the rock out of Brest. And it's just so beautiful and fun, and just, you're like, wow, it's like the best event ever. So I don't know who else is on here that I don't know, but I hope you're all seriously thinking about PBP, because it is just the greatest. Again, you have to make Brest in 39 hours, and then you have 45 hours to go back to Rambouillet. The controls are quieter, but sometimes they are at the end, that they're at the very end of who they're going to be providing sustenance to. And you, as an 84-hour rider, happen to be part of that. One factor for consideration is that if you are going for an 80-hour or lower finish, you can, I shouldn't say easily, because I chose to sleep when that opportunity presented itself, but you can arrive into Mortain and then push through to the finish and hope for that 80-hour or so finish. And I think you'll finish in the early morning hours, if I'm not correct. Is that right, Rob?
I'm sorry, say that again?
If you get to Mortain, did you guys finish in the morning? Because I know you pushed through for that 80-hour finish, right? Or sub 80-hour finish.
I was right behind Anson and Roy, and we finished in mid-morning.
Okay. Yeah, and then we finished in the afternoon. So that's our 84-hour ride in a nutshell. I wanted to let all of you know that I do have a page. I have a blog called Chasing Mailboxes. And on that blog, I don't even know how many reports, like 80 ride reports from different riders. And I tried to divide them up. Actually, before this presentation, I tried to divide them by start wave, so that you can sort through those stories and learn a little bit more about individual ride experiences. And also, if you want to see what it was like in an 80-hour group versus an 84-hour group or a 90-hour, you can certainly do that. So and if you have a story that from PBP that you haven't shared and you want it posted, send it my way. So, and that concludes my presentation. I hope I didn't go too over time, but
No.
Thanks again, Rob.
All right, thanks.
You bet.
So if I could get you to end screen
Oh
sharing?
yeah, stop screen.
No worries.
All right,
So well, there are several reasons why I asked Mary to present on the 84-hour group. One of them is because, having observed her on the 84-hour group, she and Ed were so efficient and so they had their act together. So I knew that she would be a good person to talk about this. The other reason is that secretly, while I am a committed 84-hour group starter, I want it to stay the way it is, small and quiet, because I really, really appreciate those things. And so I wouldn't be trying to persuade people to do the 84-hour group. So there we are. So next up is Mark Thomas. So Mark Thomas has been riding PBP since 1999. He's done every PBP since then. He has finished generally in the 85 to 90-hour range. There is one aberration to that, where in 2015, Mark finished in 55 hours. He is, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, the only person to get both the Adrian Hands and the Charlie Miller Society Awards. Or if I'm wrong about that, it's a very small group still.
It's a 4-person club. The most notable member is Adrian Hand's son, Ian himself.
Ah, yes. Okay, there we go. So Mark is going to give a presentation that is best summarized as the ups and downs of PBP.
Let me try to share the screen.
It looks like it's sharing.
Is that true?
Just need to run your slide presentation. There you go.
Okay, great. Yeah, pictures of me. So the topic of the conversation is the ups and downs of PBP. I'm literally going to talk about the hills. I think that a deeper understanding of the details of the course from control to control is probably a next summer project. but having some understanding of the overall terrain, I think, can help guide your training in 2022 and 23. And I think what I'd say about PBP is that it's not a flat ride. There are no major climbs on it. There are a few steep climbs on it. It's very easy to underestimate it. But deep into the second or third day, I'd say PBP really starts to seem like a hill fest. The jagged lines on this shot of the course give you an idea of what you're doing. There's just a lot of hills. It seems like the PBP town route just stitches together all the towns along the way, and the towns either seem to be down on a river or up at the top of the hill somewhere, and they seem to alternate from one to the other. I guess these are towns are formed for transportation or fortification or whatever, but at any rate, you seem to find your way downhill and uphill sort of over and over and over again as you go through PBP. One of the questions people ask is, how much climbing is there? They like to know it in feet or meters. I don't think it's easy to be very precise about the climbing, can certainly give a sense for it. The overall elevation gain on a route can be measured in a number of different ways, and people will argue about it forever about what's correct. And you can tap into a lot of email discussions about that on various groups. That's definitely beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about here. I'd say that it's 11 to 13,000 meters of climbing. I'm going to base the discussion here on the numbers that I recorded and imported into Ride with GPS from my ride in 2019, which is probably a fairly similar course to next year. It's got the same control towns, probably the same start location. And when I recorded that, I got 11,850 meters of climbing. It's funny, when I started PBP, sort of pre-altimeter, pre-me having an altimeter, pre-me having a GPS, I always said it was 10,000 meters. But looking at the records of the 3 rides that I have since I bought my first GPS, none of them been that low. But again, take the sort of exact number with a grain of salt, maybe use it to compare to the elevations shown in other Ride with GPS courses, so you can get some idea of how it compares to something that you have ridden or intend to ride. How to think about that 11,850 meters of climbing. It's similar to a number of 1200s you'll see. It's a little more than the Colorado High Country 1200, for example, in Colorado, for those of you that have done that. If you think about the overall elevation gain by distance on PBP, you're looking at about 10 meters per kilometer, or for those who like to think about it in statute units, it's about 50 feet per mile. So compare that to, say, a Super Randonneurs 600. Some people have done those here. They're challenging courses. You get extra time for them. They start at nearly 17 meters per kilometer, and many of them are more than that. Some of you have ridden brevets in Florida. The Cracker Swamp 1200, when I rode it, was less than 5 meters per kilometer. So we're looking at something between those two extremes. The lowest point of the ride, I guess the range of elevations on that profile is pretty narrow. The lowest point of the ride is at sea level in Brest. After you cross the bridge, you go down basically along the river. It comes as a matter of no small annoyance to be able to discover that the control in Brest is not indeed at sea level. The control in Brest is up about 100-meter climb, which seems very, very painful at the time after 600 kilometers, and you just want to turn around. But that's fairly typical, just one climb after another along the ride. The highest point of the ride, let's see if I can move this along, is the Rock Trevizel. It's only about 330 meters, 1,100 feet high. And it's steeper from the west than it is from the east, but even from the west, it's only 11 kilometers, about 2%. So people tend to talk a lot about it. If you look at the elevation profile, you see that it's the 2 highest points on the profile on the way out and on the way back. But honestly, it's a very easy climb, and the top can be super fun. You'll find lots of people up there with campers, with tables, people pouring drinks and cheering on riders. It can be kind of a cool place to stop and hang out a little bit in both directions and celebrating having reached the highest point of the ride. So again, no big hills on PBP, nothing like climbing the Col de Bisque or climbing a mountain pass in Colorado or climbing up to Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. It's the climbs are on a fairly narrow range of elevations. There are also, honestly, no really steep hills on the ride. I think the steepest climbs on the ride are about 10%. I kind of looked back at my notes and I didn't see much that was higher than that. And certainly those are not super long. The real challenge, I think, is the relentlessness of the climbs. As I mentioned before, they just kind of keep coming at you. And if you look at that profile, you'll see there's actually not very much on there that's very flat. There aren't any sort of extended stretches along a lake or along a river that are kind of flat. You tend to be going up or going down much of the ride. People ask, where is the climbing? The answer is sort of everywhere. I think, especially with the adrenaline of the start, the first part of the ride always seems really easy and almost flat. And then as you approach the first food stop in Mortagne-au-Perche on the way out, you get hit with a couple of climbs and you go, oh, yeah, all right, there are going to be some climbs on this ride. And I think that's where it starts to signal to you what you're going to experience on the way. I tend to think of PBP, always have kind of thought of it in sort of three big chunks. The start to Ludiac, Ludiac out to the turnaround at Brest and back to Ludiac, and then from Ludiac to the finish. Indeed, the first couple times I rode the ride, the 90-hour starts were pretty deep into the night. And so this is actually kind of the way we rode it. We rode out to near Ludiac, slept, rode back to Ludiac and slept, and then came through to the finish over the next day, night, and early morning. It's a little different now. 90-hour starts start a little earlier. And of course, depending on the start times, they've changed. If you take the start times that Max and Mary were talked about, it might look a little bit different. But when you look at this, the first part of the ride is 440 kilometers. It's about 9 meters per kilometer, so less than the average. The middle part, the 340 kilometers from Ludiac Brest out to Ludiac, are honestly pretty climby. That's 11 meters per kilometer of climbing. And then the way back from Ludiac is similar. There's a lot of variation within each of those segments in how climbiness it is from leg to leg. I think from Brest back up to Carhaix is close to 12 meters per kilometer. And then obviously between individual controls, there are hillier stretches and flatter stretches. But it's reasonably consistent throughout with more climbing in the middle. Let's see. So what does that do to your speed? As Rob mentioned, I did ride one PBP fast, and on that one afterwards, I was so proud of myself. I looked at all my times and speeds by section, etc. From the start to Ludiac, it was nearly 29 kilometers per hour. And then either because it got hilly or because I got tired, it went down substantially. And I think that's consistent with the notes that people gave earlier about how much more time to expect on your way back from Brest than it took on the way out. Not only will you likely ride slower, you'll probably take more time at controls, etc. So I guess I'd say the important thing to think about now is, how do you get ready for these hills? What's the right thing to do over the next period of time? And I guess the primary thing is just don't shy away from hills in your training or your riding. And if you think about that middle section that I was talking about, you're talking about having a 300 kilometer brevet with 3,300 meters, 11,000 feet of climbing. Or if you ride double centuries, think of it as a double century with 12,000 feet of climbing. So that's not the hilliest, those aren't the hilliest rides out there, but they're definitely not the flattest either. And so it's worth thinking about that. And I would recommend actually sometime in the next years, Not so much for training your legs and your lungs, but more for kind of training your head about how you're going to feel on a ride on this kind of terrain. Try to find a 300K or a 400K with that amount of climbing, and preferably find one where the climbing is really PVP like. And by that, I mean, with a lot of short hills rather than big, long pass climbs. You can get that same kind of elevation by going over a few long passes, but that doesn't train you as well for the feeling you're going to have at PVP when there are a lot of shorter, steeper, quicker hills. It just feels different. Or if you can't find a 300 or 400 like that, you can find similar terrain and do a couple of days of riding. And I'm aware that people living in different places have different access to terrain, and some people might have to travel to do this. And there have been plenty of successful finishers at PVP from flatter places, so it's not impossible. But I certainly wouldn't want you to underestimate the hills and not have at least had some opportunity to see how those go. When I titled the presentation, highs and lows, ups and downs, somebody said, well, you're going to talk about emotional ups and downs. And I said, well, I suppose I could. Because there will be ups and downs along the ride. I think for almost everybody at some point on the ride, there are places where you want to quit. I'd say surprisingly many of those emotional lows are probably more bunks than anything else. So have some food. As somebody said here in SIR early when I joined, never quit till you've had an apple turnover. I don't know if they have apple turnovers in France or what they call them, but look for a pastry. Things to do when you're experiencing a low, look for food. Take a nap. Maybe you're just tired. A nap may pay off. You may have additional speed after your nap that'll offset the time spent. Find a friend to ride with. Stop thinking about the whole ride and how impossible the rest of it seems and how nothing seems to work. Focus on the next bit, make it to the next control or even to the next town or even to the top of the next hill. And I think another thing that happens is sometimes you need to let go of some things. You let go of expectations maybe that you had for the ride or pacing or time at a certain place that's become unrealistic because of, for whatever reason. Or maybe you have to let go of that group that's traveling just a mile an hour faster than you're comfortable with. Focus instead maybe on how much fun it'll be just to ride the next 5 miles out there in the French countryside, far from home, far from work. That's pretty cool. Highs, there are lots of highs on PVP for me, I think. Have fun. I have some friends that I ride with, and at PVP, they say, what are we doing? We're riding bikes. Where are we doing it? We're in France. We're riding bikes in France with friends. How cool is that? Meet other riders, find the commonality and community you have with your fellow travelers. As many people have said about PVP, enjoy the hospitality. The folks along the way, they absolutely love the event and they genuinely want to help. Enjoy their hospitality, appreciate their cheers, which will be out there for you day and night. It's pretty cool. And just revel in the event. PVP is that big randonneur party. You and thousands of other people from every corner of the world have spent years trying to get to PVP, and now you're here. That's just awesome. That's all I have to say.
Well, thanks, Mark. Can I get you to stop sharing?
I am trying. Let's see.
Okay. So just a reminder, if you have questions for Mark, you can ask those in the Q&A feature. Just preface the question with Mark and then ask your question. There's still time if you have questions for some of the other panelists. Go ahead and ask those too in the Q&A feature, and we'll get those answered. So right now, I want to switch over from presentation mode to more of an interview mode here. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because, let me see here, Mark, it looks like you are still right there in the middle of all that. There we go. So as I was saying, I wanted to have an interview with a past PBP participant who could then give you some of the first person reactions to, well, I've got a whole series of questions to ask of Narayan, and trying to put him back into the time frame of when he was first pondering doing PBP at all. So first off, let me more formally introduce Narayan here. He started randonneuring in 2004 with the BC Randonneurs, and now he rides with the Seattle International Randonneurs. He explains to me that he is a card-carrying member of the Cyclos Escargot and loves the camaraderie, the challenge, even the convenience food, convenience store food, but most importantly, the trinkets that he gets in from riding brevets. So, so I first met you, I believe it was in France at PBP 2011. And
yes. Yes.
one of the things that I remember so much was just your openness and friendliness that made an impact on me. And for those that are considering going to PBP, of course, you're going to see parts of France. Of course, you're going to see the residents of the French countryside. But this is also a very unique opportunity for you to meet randonneurs from your own country, which you almost would never see. People from other regions that you don't make trips to their area much. You might know them from discussion groups, but you only know the name. You might recognize the electrons coming from their email, but that's it. So I got to meet Narayan there and enjoyed doing that, and wanted to bring him into these presentations, these seminars, and ask him to think back. So your first PBP was 2011, although you considered doing it in 2007. I think you dodged a bullet there by having life overtake events and you're not being able to go then, but put yourself back into that time frame. And first off, how did you find out about PBP? And then take the next step of deciding, yeah, I could do this. I'm going to try that.
Hi, everybody. I found out about PBP from Kent Peterson on the touring mailing list, where they were discussing the difference between brevets and permanents and other Audax rides. And that immediately piqued my interest. And that was 2003, I want to say, 2000, after the event finished. And in 2004, I did my first 200K. And people were still talking about what PBP 2003 was at that event. So it was very interesting to me that somebody would talk about an event a year after it happened. And so I started reading ride reports and tracking things down. So the basic idea to me that was appealing to me personally was the fact that we typically get harassed on the roads, right? You know, if somebody throws eggs at you or, you know, say, you know, get off the road or whatever. But here was an event where people were actually celebrating cyclists for being out on the road. So I wanted to do that ever since.
And I think I know the answer here, but you found that. You expected that, and you actually found that to be true.
Yes. It was an experience unlike nothing else. You know, like the first, you're riding with people from every country, right? You know, most of the random countries in the world are represented there. And it was just a mind-boggling experience, even if it meant that I couldn't hang with any of those people because, you know, I'm not particularly athletically gifted.
So do you have a favorite experience, small experience within all of the PBPs that you've done? One that you think of and always brings a smile, or was a turning point or something?
Yes, I think I think by far, and this is also a funny memory, and that's why it sticks in my memory at least, is it was coming back into Villeneuve-la-Joelle. I'm pretty sure I'm murdering the pronunciation of that, but there's this little town called Le Ribet, which is where the course crosses the N12 highway. And a little before that is a town called Ardanche, I think Ardanche. And I pull up and I basically have like maybe an hour in the bank, maybe an hour and 20 minutes in the bank. And I pulled it and I'm out of water. And so I pull into this little roadside stand. And, the moment you go, like 10 people show up, right? Like me and another French rider, we're recumbent rider, we're together. And we pull in, I lean my bike against the wall. And these 10 people start coming and start bombarding me with questions, right? Like, where are you from? What are you? How did you know about PBP? All of those questions. And of course, I couldn't understand most of what the questions were. The French writer translated it for me. And at some point, my confidence kind of grew. Maybe I should also mention that at this point, I'd had 3.5 hours worth of sleep over the last 3 days, right? So I was not particularly mentally sharp. And one of the questions that was asked was, do you have family here, right? Whatever. And I said, oui. And I said, mon mari est Londres, meaning what I wanted to say was, my wife is in London. And what I ended up saying was, my husband is London. And the crowd was like, votre mari? I go, oui, votre mari, like confidently wrong, right? Because you're like, no idea. And then like 20 seconds later, it hit me that I had made a colossal blunder. And I said, oh, no, ma femme. And then they all just burst out laughing, right? So even today, that memory brings a smile to my face. So every time I get too aggressive in speaking French or thinking I know French, I go back to that one instance to tamp my enthusiasm down a little bit and go, your French is not that great. So zip it.
Yeah, I have a similar experience myself. 2015, leaving Villeneuve-la-Joelle, and I'm coming through one of the next small towns, and I had ridden past a setup that somebody just local had done to provide comfort to the riders, and I noticed that there was available a bathroom, and so I had passed by this, and then of course, after you pass by something is when it dawns on you that you could make use of that. So in the center of this small little village, I stop and everyone is pointing like, this is where you go. And I turn around and ride away and go back to take care of business there. But when I came back through town, they're all like, what are you doing here again? And I just said, WC. And they all laughed and understood that I had turned around to take care of some pressing business. So these sorts of things, you mentioned hearing ride reports and talking to people about PBP before you showed up. That's what helped frame your perspective on whether you wanted to do it or not. Now I want to kind of switch gears and say, why did you go back a second time?
That's an interesting question. So I think fundamentally, my first goal in 2011 was to finish, right? And being slow, I realized that I wouldn't be able to hang in any of the towns and savor the experience with people as much as I wanted to. So what I did was take notes about where I wanted to go and how much time I wanted to spend where. And so that's why I fundamentally went back, is to see if I could A, improve, B, get a better bike, change equipment, do all of those things that would get you further down the road, with the explicit purpose of then cashing that into places to stay or experiences to savor or people to meet and spend more time with. Villeneuve-la-Joelle stuck out. That is, I left Villeneuve-la-Joie almost in tears because, everybody applauds and claps on the way in and on the way out, right? That is like, it was an emotional moment. And I think more than one of my fellow writers since then in 2019 have been moved to tears, actually tears at Villeneuve. So I say the reason I went back was to A, see if I could do it better, and B, to enjoy the experience and stop in towns. Like, for example, I wanted to hang out in Ambry-Laval on the way back. I wanted to hang out in Cizan. I wanted to hang out in Villeneuve-la-Joie a little bit more. And that is why I went back.
So after recounting that, could you say that any of these things were in the category of, I wish I knew them before I did my first one? Or were these only lessons to be learned going a second time?
I think you get a sense for what the event is, but unless you experience it, you truly don't know. So to me, like, for example, Ken Critchman told me that, hey, don't mess around between Villeneuve-la-Joie and Mortagne. And what did I do the first time I went there? I messed around in Villeneuve-la-Joie to Mortagne, right? You just don't mess around. And I made Mortagne with 3 minutes to spare. And that is not something that I would have expected. So in hindsight, yes, as much as you know these things or hear about these things, until you experience them, you can't really get a sense of what they are.
Sort of like being a parent, right?
Yes. And also at that point, I had never gone above 1,000 kilometers ever, right? So when you hit Villeneuve-la-Joie on the way back, you're at 1,009K, and that is truly uncharted territory, right? So the last 200K, you truly don't know how you're going to be. But in 2015, I knew at least how I would be, and I knew I'd be trash. So the experience was much better.
So I want to ask, would you ever look at any of the 3 PVPs that you've done as duplicative of any of the others? Or are they, like, for my experience, they are so individual from each other. They're completely different things. So it's not like really doing it the same thing again. It's a different experience.
No, I mean, I heard a quote from somebody that you never step into the same river twice. And if there is any ride where that is true, that is PVP. In 2011, we had really nasty rains for a little bit, and then it completely changed, right? It was gorgeous afterward. In 2015, we had a gorgeous, 3 days and then a horrendous 8 hours. And in 2019, the overnight lows were unlike anything I'd seen before. So you literally, it is impossible to recreate the experience. It is, as much as you write the same course, mostly, it is not a duplicative effort.
Okay. So I wanted to ask if there was anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to impart to the viewers today.
Yes, I think the things that I changed between 11 and 15 were bike and body, right? And I don't think that I quite understood what it meant to do PVP again and improve with what I had done, right? Which is, I got a new bike, which is an awesome bike, and it definitely was not the tank that I rode the first time around. However, the one thing I would say is that a lot of us focus too much on the distance riding aspect of it, to the point where we go, oh, you have to do 1,000K, you have to do this, you have to do that, in terms of being on the bike, right? But the biggest change for me was the realization that it is off the bike work that really puts you over the top, especially when you're a slow rider like me. With a little bit of weight training, with a little bit of core work, and all my friends will roll their eyes now, is to do some core work, do some planks, do some front planks and side planks, because it doesn't really take that much time. All you need to do is do like maybe 2 or 3 1-minute planks, front planks, and side planks for like 30 seconds or 45 seconds once a day, right? And you find yourself holding yourself up on the bike better. You have fewer neck issues. Your back is stronger, and overall, I arrived at the finish in much better shape, having done the weight training and the core work, right? So my biggest takeaway between all 3 PBPs is that off the bike work truly makes a difference in how you feel on the bike.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining the presentation today. And
Thank
will I see you in 2023 in France?
Yes, even if I have to pedal one-legged, I will be there.
Okay, great. So now I'd like to switch gears to the wrap-up section here. And I would like for the presenters to go in the same order to read out your selection of the best question that was asked of you in the Q&A feature. There's a few unanswered questions right now in the Q&A feature. So while Max is starting out to read out and then answer the best or the most frequent question, the rest of us can take a look in the Q&A section. Go ahead, Max.
Let's see. I think the only one that was directly asked of me was if I were targeting Charlie Miller, would I try for the A wave, or would B, or one of the later ones, be a little less dangerous but still mostly as fast? It's a little bit hard to say. It's obviously in my case a sample size of 2. But based on those samples, I probably would avoid the later star waves like D and E and so on. I would probably, if I decide ever to try to attempt Charlie Miller again, I would probably go for A or B. There doesn't seem to be much difference in A and B. I think it definitely, the first 20 or 30 kilometers are definitely risky, and they are in fact my main consideration in deciding whether to try to do such a thing again or not. But I do think that they are most effective for having that kind of performance, I suppose.
Oh. So Max, will we see you in Paris in 2023?
I hope so.
Okay, cool.
As some of you know, I had a pretty bad injury in the fall of 2020 that I'm still sort of mentally recovering from. It was a very bad leg break caused by a collision with a badger in the middle of the night on a 400K. But I am, if you had asked me this a year ago, I would have been much more dubious. And now the sort of Randonneurs is setting in also with regard to badgers.
Right. So despite this experience, you don't hold anything against Wisconsin?
Oh yeah, I guess I don't know that much about states and their.
Yeah, they're the badger state.
Yes.
Thanks, Max. So Deb, do you have a favorite or best or most frequently asked question of you?
No, I only got one question specifically to me that was about the rack that was on the slide, I believe in Rambouillet. And it was a Gilles 2 rack and Gilles 2 bag that was on the back of it. Everybody uses a different system. That actually is a picture of my partner's setup. That's not the setup I use, but again, everybody's got to figure out what they're going to use and get comfortable with it way before you go to France.
Okay. Thanks, Deb.
Oh, you're not going to ask me if I'm going to PvP?
I know that over a beer in sometime very, very soon, you're going to be telling me.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
Okay. So, Mary, did you get many questions? And
I didn't
what was
get
the best or the favorite.
I didn't get too many questions. Someone asked about the time splits, how they compared to what Mark had put up, and I don't know how they stacked up against what Mark presented. But the first day of riding, we had a 15 mile an hour average, and then for the remainder of the days of riding, we averaged 13.5 miles an hour. So, although it's so funny, speaking of Randonnesia, I could have sworn we were going faster on those last 3 days. But, and then we target to sleep 3 to 4 hours a night. But, you know, once the ride starts, you just roll with what you get. So, and I guess the last thing I would say is that on PVP 2019, I didn't anticipate that the nights would be so cold. And so to this day, I still hear Ed talk about how he left this jacket behind, that if he had only been wearing it, he would be warm. So just know that when you go to PVP, the weather can be really anything. And if there's something you think you need, then you should find a place for it on your bike.
Yeah. So should we be looking for Ed's jacket when we go?
No, he's got it now.
Oh, good.
It was in a closet.
Okay.
It was safe in a closet at home the entire ride.
All right. Thanks. So Mark, did you get questions, and were there good ones or best ones that you want to recount here?
I don't think anybody asked any questions about the terrain at PVP, since, you know, I said it was hilly, and that's probably all you need to know. There were a couple of questions about, there's one question that probably people want to know the answer to, which is, if you choose the 80 or 84 hour start time, do you have to finish within that time? In other words, is 80 or 84 a limit and not a soft goal? And it's important to know that it is in fact a limit. If you choose the 80-hour start time and you finish in 81 hours, you didn't finish. Similarly with the 84. I think a couple people asked, and I may not have the most up-to-date information, but a couple people asked whether Rambouillet has been confirmed as the official start location. And I believe that the last we heard officially was that the start has not yet been decided, but should be Rambouillet, whatever that phrase means. And that an announcement will be forthcoming as soon as possible. But as far as I know, that has not been made yet.
Okay. Narayan, did you get any questions to answer?
No, the only question was for all of the panels, and that is for whether fenders or no fenders in PVP. My personal recommendation is that if the forecast does not call for rain, don't carry fenders. Don't put fenders on. Carry them to France, please. Just don't put them on if that is your style. But if the forecast calls for rain, there's a lot of manure on the roads in France, especially along the course. And so please put fenders on if it's going to rain.
Well, one thing that I would point out is that I've been to PVP in 07, 11, 15, and 19, and have not done PVP without getting rained on. So take that into consideration. One thing to note is that the effects of rain were different on the different start groups. I believe in 2011, people in the 84-hour group got a lot more rain than those that had started the day before in the 80 and 90-hour group. So you'll hear stories, you'll have to put them into the context of the person telling you that story. So I think we've covered everything here. We've got all of our presenters in. I want to thank all of them for taking the time to make this presentation and then to be here today to present it to all of you. Just a reminder to everybody that's watching that eventually, hopefully this week, I will get the recording of this session up on YouTube. And for anybody that this is their first RUSA PVP prep seminar, there are 2 others already recorded and up on YouTube. And I'll include that when I send around the link to all the people that had signed up. I think that will end here unless any of my panelists have any final thoughts to make.
Thanks, Rob.
Go
ahead, Max.
Well, I also want to thank you. I think like Mary just did. Sorry for cutting you off, Mary.
Okay.
But the other thing that I wanted to say was Greg asked this question of, which I think was tongue in cheek, as to whether PvP is a race or not, right? And this was right after my presentation. I think it's definitely not a race, right? Because not everyone is like sort of racing with you. And I think, but it can be sort of an athletic challenge, like an individual time trial kind of thing. Like how fast can you go in this sort of historic event? But it's also, I think, what people make of it, right? So people who are in there for the food, for the sort of culture and sort of social aspect. And I think that's what makes it really wonderful, is that it can be many things to many people, and also multiple things for the same person at the same time. And I should add that, certainly if you're trying to do like Charlie Miller, you are not going to get to interact with lots of like French people in the villages. That's like very unlikely. However, you do make lots of great friendships on the road, right? Like, because there are going to be people from all over the world. Even if you're going, even if you're riding hard and sort of struggling, you will meet people and might be able to talk with them depending on linguistic barriers. And that can be quite fun and lead to, long-term friendships, like people that I'm still in touch with, 10 years later. So.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Rob, just thank you for putting this together. And I sure hope to see all the panelists and all the participants in France next year.
Okay. So
Thank
just
you,
a reminder to everybody that is attending today, there is a questionnaire as you exit. And one of those questions is to suggest future topics for other seminars later down the road. So please fill out that. And I thank you all for attending. And again, I thank all my panelists, and we will see you next time. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.